All right. We have to do the gem segment before we get to the post game. David Griscom, what do we got?
Yeah, I mean, so over the weekend, there were massive power outages in Washington, D.C., which were very significant, around 39,000 people without power in weather that was in the upper 90s.
Yep.
They're not alone. New York City also had a major power outage. And
Con Edison helpfully choosing to put the power off in Canarsie, predominantly black and working class neighborhood, as a conscious decision.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder why they chose that place.
Well, absolutely.
Well done
and we're
by
going to...
the should be immediately seized Con Ed. Sorry to step on you.
Oh, no, I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about. I mean, our friend Bill de Blasio, who's been cosplaying a radical leftist for the past couple of months, did come out.
I like de Blasio's campaign mode.
It has been fun to watch, but
yes.
Came out and said that he was, basically threatened Con Ed with a public takeover of the company if they can't get themselves together. And in D.C., we're also looking at another one of these private electricity corporations. Now, we've already talked a lot about the nightmare that is PG&E, but I really want to take a moment to talk about the devastation and the problems that have come from the private ownership of our public utility system in the United States. So over 70% of household energy consumption comes from private sources in the United States. That has not always been the case. In the 80s and 90s, there was a huge rush for privatization. And the problem that comes with privatization is that you have, one, massive inequities, as Michael was just talking about in the practice, and two, the profit motive is always creating hiccups in these services. So, in the case of PG&E, obviously to hold on to their monopoly, they have to lobby and spend $10 million a year to be able to afford lobbyists, where a company that was owned by the city would not necessarily have that tension. And when we're talking about moving towards a Green New Deal and dealing with the ecological effects of climate change, our energy consumption is going to be the number one way that we start to deal with that problem. So currently, only 17% of the United States electricity comes from renewables. We obviously need to be moving towards 95 to 100% in the near future. That's going to be very difficult to do if you're dealing with private boards. Not only is publicly owned utilities, city-owned utilities, better for democratic control, they also tend to be dramatically cheaper. Publicly in 32 out of 48 states where both public and private electric systems are in existence, 32 are cheaper than the overall 48. So it actually tends to be significantly cheaper. Just looking at one example, Winter Park, Florida, which was able to wrestle after a long fight with their privately owned utility system, was able to wrestle it into public control. Now the city is getting back $48 million in general revenue, which not only goes to the electrical grid, but it also helps support city services and the municipality function. And residents of Winter Park, Florida are paying 12% less than their neighbors. Texas is another great example of this. In 1999, our good friend George Bush deregulated the Texas electrical system, and that was supposed to create competition, and competition would start kicking in.
Competition would start kicking in.
Exactly. I'm sure
Just
we
trying
have
to talk about ideas.
You got drones.
You got drones. You got blah, blah, blah. There's not a single thing, Joe Rogan, that would hurt your
George
life.
Bush, Joe Rogan.
Well, that's too close. I was actually doing George Bush, Dave Rubin, but Joe Rogan may be a little too close, which is sort of like, so you're talking Marianne Williamson. That's not even really politics, is it?
It's
It's like
honest,
people working together.
if George Bush was president right now, he would go on Joe Rogan's show.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, it's 100%.
But in Texas, 85% of residents get their electricity
And he would be
from
good at
the
it.
deregulated
Scary.
market.
Sorry.
What?
go ahead. And he'd be really good at
he
it.
would,
which is
yeah.
Scary,
Oh, yeah, probably.
Yeah.
They 85% of residents get their electricity through the deregulated market, while the 15% that are still on the unregulated on the regulated markets, including cities like Austin, Texas, which owns their own electricity, and San Antonio, which also owns their electricity, pay significantly less than people who have privately held electric companies. And this is a significant tension as we start to want to transform our electrical system. system. Not only is it going to be much more difficult to create a green system under a privately held company, which is always trying to squeeze out as many profits as possible, the amount of failure in infrastructure in privately held companies is horrifying. The human cost in PG&E is very significant, and that comes from the fact that PG&E in California is always trying to pay out their stockholders and corporate salaries compared to publicly owned companies, which are able to take their revenue and invest in green energy. And it's not a surprise that many of the parts of the country that are leading in green energy are areas where their public system, their electricity system is publicly controlled. And lastly, just to hit home what Michael was saying at the beginning, not only when we talk about public electricity and power for cities, we're talking about the effects of climate change, but we also need to talk about how those are produced and the direct effects of energy production in the United States. That means coal plants. And typically what happens with coal plants across the country is they are situated in poor, black, minority communities. If we are able to take this system under public control, we can put democratic pressure on these organizations. Now, that's not saying that just putting it under city control by itself will do it, but it's going to be far more responsive than the current system, where people who are just searching for endless profit are willing to pollute the earth, choke out the individuals in their community, and constantly fail to deliver reliable service at a fair price.
Excellent. You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.